A little bit different. On this episode of Unbeatable, I get a chance to hear a woman who is living out a dream that I've had all the way back early in my career in the United States Army. Alani Bankhead has taken her skill set and she has used what she's learned from the United States military to make a huge difference and make the world a better place. So I can't wait for you to hear from my guest, Alani Bankhead, on this episode of Unbeatable. Hey guys, before we get into this episode, let me remind you that the wait is over. We are about to launch a really big, really special replacement for this podcast. And here's a special announcement that will tell you a little bit more about what's coming down the pike in just a few weeks. Check this out, will you? Hey everyone, today I've got some big news to share. After 3 years of a weekly podcast interviewing some amazing guests, I'm going to make a huge transition. Man, your support to me over the last 3 years has meant the world. But as we move forward, I'm going to replace the Unbeatable podcast, both audio and video, with a television show. You don't have to live in the local area to watch this television show, because the television show is going to broadcast on the internet. It'll be available on Apple TV, on Roku, on Amazon. In fact, I'm launching an entire television channel called Jeff Strucker Ministries. Now, this new venture, it aims to empower lives. We're going to try to inspire people's faith, and I want to continue to try to make an impact. But this new venture is designed to make an eternal impact. And if you'll stay with me, and the entire Unbeatable Army will come with me, together we'll continue to inspire and uplift people. We'll create change that will last in people's lives over a lifetime. And we'll try to do something that will shake the foundations of heaven, that will matter into eternity. I just want to tell you thanks. Thanks for being so loyal to the podcast, and thanks for your continued support. Now, stay tuned for more updates about this television show, about the television channel that I'm creating to replace the Unbeatable podcast called Jeff Strucker Ministries. Can't wait for you to see it as we get ready to launch it in just a few weeks. See you guys. And now my interview with Alani Bankhead.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Hey Alani, welcome to the Unbeatable podcast. Thank you for being my guest today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me, Jeff.
Yeah, I do this every single time I'm talking to a warrior. Thank you also for your service to our country and what you've done for our freedom.
Thank you so much. That's very generous of you to say.
Yeah. You got a lot in your background that I would like to talk about. In fact, there's way too much in your background that I'm going to be able to cover in one episode, because I'm pretty much fascinated by almost everything that you've done in your past. But let's start off with the U.S. Air Force. Let's talk about how a U.S. Air Force military intelligence leader ends up making a huge impact in child trafficking, in runaways, among people that are on the streets, and how you're coaching others to do it now. So I kind of want to see how this transition in life has happened for you.
Yeah, totally. It's been the wildest ride and something I could not have imagined. So, yeah.
I'm sure. Why the U.S. Air Force? When did you start off in the Air Force? What was your goal in joining the Air Force?
Oh man, we're going way back. Okay,
Yeah, we are. We're going back in time now.
My dad is career Army, and he was a Latin America foreign area officer. And so we lived in embassies in South America, and he actually was the Army attaché at the embassy in Colombia, like during Pablo Escobar
Oh,
time.
yeah, I know all about it.
Yeah. And so as a high schooler, seeing the impact of the narco trade on a whole country, angered me. And so at the time, I was like, I'm going to join the army and I'm going to bust narco
I'm gonna
traffickers.
go, yeah, I'm gonna go bust a bunch of drug traffickers.
100%. I was ready. And then I ended up I had this JROTC instructor who was a retired Air Force guy, and he was like, "You got to apply for the Air Force." And I like did it out of obligation. And thank goodness, because they offered me a scholarship to pay for college, which I needed. So that's how I ended up in the Air Force. And then I wanted to be an intel officer because I wanted to bust drug traffickers. And then initially out of college, I got personnel and I cried the ugliest snot bubble tears because I thought my life was over. But it worked out perfectly the way it was supposed to, because I'm doing exactly what I meant to do, working
Yeah.
counterintelligence and stuff rather than the regular intel side of the house. So
For all of the listeners out there, there is a lot in your background that is highly classified. We're going to have to dance around that with the language today. So I'm going to do my best to dance with you, Alani, so that we don't violate any national secrets out there. Um, but I'm fascinated. You know, I retired from the Army myself. I had a couple of children that were in the military, and I've talked to countless young men and women who are thinking about it. And I make the same suggestion to almost all of them. If you really, really want to go fight wars, kill the enemy, and win, the next war and defeat the military, then join the army or become special operations in one of the branches. If that's not what you're looking for, and I made this suggestion to my own son, then join the Air Force because it's so much better in the Air Force than it is in the Army. And one of my children took me up on that and joined the Air Force. In other words, did Dad give you any hints about the difference between the Army and the Air Force, or was it just that junior ROTC instructor?
that's hilarious. Actually, I mean, my dad was really, expecting me to go to the army as well. And I think he was a little disappointed when I chose
Really?
Air Force, actually. Yeah. But now, like we have our inter-service rivalries, right?
Yeah,
Where
of
we're all
course.
making fun of each other. And so whenever, an Army or Marine Corps guy wants to clown on me, I'm like, I'll just go back to my five-star hotel and cry into
That's
my
right. And
pajamas.
eat my gourmet meal while you're pulling open an MRE and sleeping on the ground, right?
Yeah.
Um, many people, even people in the military, have never heard of a foreign affairs or a foreign affairs officer. I know exactly what that is, but there's lots of people that are saying, wait, hold on just a second. Your dad was part of the US military, but he worked at embassies. Can you describe not the whole role of FAO, but just what your dad is like, what life is like for you, your family, and your dad in Colombia when Pablo Escobar is the world's number one enemy?
For sure. So foreign air officers are specialists. They're regional specialists. And so we're Puerto Rican. And obviously, my parents had the Spanish down pat and had an
Wait a second. Do
interest.
you speak Spanish? Are
I
you fluent?
do. I do.
Way to go, girl.
Yes.
All right.
And so Uh, my dad was one of the attachés in the embassy, and so they're actually responsible for all the intelligence stuff in country. They do other things as well, but at that time in Colombia, he was really into the combating narco trafficking, and so working with local law enforcement or government officials to partner with that country. So he was the army's representative
Right.
to partner,
Yeah.
in that effort.
The reason I'm asking this question is so that the listeners out there hear your dad, although he still belongs to the US Department of Defense and is part of the US Army, he's basically much more like a State Department official and working on behalf of the Department of State, which
Yeah,
is rare, but it's also an amazing opportunity
yes,
for a teenage girl to grow up, working and grow up with a family that's around the embassies. And
absolutely.
really, you get a chance to see global leadership and global politics, while you're still in high school.
100%. Yeah, and that's ultimately what really drove me to the military was having that experience of being that diplomat and that representative
Yeah.
was incredible.
You go from one extreme, embassies in Latin America, to another extreme, becoming basically MI and personnel expert in the U.S. Air Force during the wars on terrorism. So Let's talk about transitioning into, the work that you did in the military intelligence arena.
Totally. So I came in as a personnelist. I kept trying to get back to South America to do counter drug stuff however I could. Wasn't happening. And long story short, I got kind of bored in my personnel capacity and I was looking for another challenge. And at the time, the Air Force was downsizing. They were cutting thousands of personnel. And so they were like, your only job options are pilot, medical, and OSI, which is the Office of Special Investigations. So most people know NCIS.
Yeah,
So
it's the NCIS of the Air
yeah.
Force. Yep.
Yes. And so at that point, I'd had several supervisors comment to me that I would make a great OSI agent, but I completely blew them off because I thought OSI was like internal affairs. And I was like, I'm not a snitch. That's not how I
Yeah.
roll. I would never do that.
All right. I love it. Yes.
And then by that point, that was like the fourth or fifth kind of sign from the universe. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna apply for this thing. I don't think I'm gonna get it.
Not
And then
even
a
sure I
year later,
want to do it, but I'm going to try it
oh,
anyway.
100%. It was like snark on snark that I was throwing up to the universe. And I didn't hear anything for almost a year, forgot about it. And then they call me and they're like, congratulations, you're in. You leave in 2 weeks. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a snitch. And that's not what it is. That's not at all what I experienced. And then one of my first cases I ever had was an attempted murder case turned into a child predator case. And when I realized that I could be a tool for justice to protect the vulnerable, I was like hooked. So that's
Yeah.
how I ended up in that.
How far along were you in your career in the Air Force when you made this transition?
I was 4 years in.
Okay.
Mhm.
And you were an Air Force officer at the time.
Yes.
And you were doing this on active duty or in, yeah,
I
okay,
took mhm.
good. The role of OSI on the battlefield is extremely important, but behind the scenes, and a lot of people have no idea. And obviously, you and I have to be careful now about not giving away secrets, but can you describe a little bit of what some of your role was like on the battlefield? Because quite honestly, just before I met you in this conversation today, it occurred to me there is a high probability that you and I were on the same battlefield at the same time, probably doing the same operations and never got a chance to see each other or meet each other. But it's possible that you and I were
Yeah,
deployed together at the same place at the same time. So let's talk
definitely.
about what you did.
Yeah, so just at a high level, the military criminal investigation organizations for the Department of Defense, they're like the FBI, the CIA, DEA, ATF, so all the three-letter agencies in one. So we have to have a drug mission, we have to have a counterintelligence mission, we have to have a fugitive mission. And so when we deploy, like the military makes war, that's our job. And so when we deploy as special agents, our job is to identify spies, neutralize them, or like exploit them. And the whole goal is making sure that our forces aren't attacked, that we're preventing attacks, that we're protecting the service members and the equipment, as well as obviously like the innocent civilians in country. But so our function is identify, neutralize, exploit spies, terrorists. That's what we do.
And you did a lot of it or with the US Special Operations Forces overseas, is that right?
I did. I was a human intelligence operator for
Okay,
them.
so I know exactly what that means for the listeners. Let me try to paint a very generic, very quick picture in the intelligence apparatus of any country. You have people that are listening in on conversations. That's the signals intelligence. You have people that do intelligence from pictures by many different sources. That's image intelligence. And then you have like the crown jewel of intelligence, which is human intelligence, and human intelligence is really, really hard to pull off because it takes a long time with deep relationships to get viable information. But I just referred to it to the listeners as the crown jewel. And I know this because most of my life, my missions in combat in the special operations world were based on human intelligence. It's the crown jewel because it's the one thing that you can rely on. It just takes a really, really long time and a lot of hard work to develop the trust to be able to get good, actionable intelligence. So describe some of the hard work that you had to do. I just wrote your language down: identifying, neutralizing, or exploiting spies. Because right now, everybody, even the mom in the minivan, is turning the volume up, saying, "I gotta hear what this is like for her."
Yeah, and no, I mean, it was definitely crazy 'cause I mean, it's literally like in the movies, right, where you have briefcases full of money and you're exchanging that money for
She just
intelligence,
said,
and
"Briefcase is full of money." Yep,
I
just like the
mean,
movies.
it's crazy, and, so, like, one of the first unit I was attached to, we were focused with finding senior Al-Qaeda leaders in Iraq, and that meant that a lot of my we call them sources, the CIA calls them assets, you can call them informants, whatever you want, but a lot of my sources were themselves Al-Qaeda operatives, which is, like, crazy, so I'm sitting across the table building a relationship with a known
Al-Qaeda, just so
terrorist.
that you can get to know more senior Al-Qaeda leaders.
Exactly, exactly, and so that was a crazy, like, completely rearranged my worldview. It made me grateful to be American on so many levels because a lot of them were highly intelligent people, but because they were born Iraqi and poor, they had to make car bombs, like, they were good with cars. I'm like, "You could be an engineer," right? So for those of you listening, like, be thankful you won the
Yeah,
lottery of being born in
that's
America.
right. You can work at a mechanic shop and not have to build car bombs for a living.
Yes, exactly, yes. So, that was really interesting, and then, of course, there's that quote of, like, "No op plan survives first contact." So, you get all this training, and then day 1, they're like, "Let's throw all that out the window," and, "No, you don't wear all your, like, tactical vest and gear," like, we go out soft vehicle, and I'm just like, What is happening?" So, but it was really fascinating work, and to your point, the human intelligence cycle, it does take a long time because it is about
It's
relationship,
super
and it
hard.
takes
Oh, man,
time
it's
to
super hard. Yeah.
yes, and so, but it was I'm very honored to have had the opportunity to do that work because, the thing is, people are like, "Well, you're saving lives," but you never actually know, right? Because you
Yeah.
can't count people that were saved, but it gave me the opportunity to cultivate more of that kind of spiritual belief side of, like, because when things get hard and things do get hard, like, it was a hard time downrange as well, but you have to cling to that belief that, like, your why of why you're there and that you're doing what the work you're doing is making an impact kind of thing. So it was incredible, it was so hard, it was all the things, so.
Did anyone ever tell you after a mission was over with, did you get a chance to hear from any of the operators, the difference that you made on specific targets and the lives that you saved, just the hard work that you did? Have you ever got that kind of feedback?
I did one time, there was a case where there were 3 women who were they had suicide vests, and they were planning an attack, and so they were able to neutralize that attack potentially, and, so that was the only time I got feedback was, "Wow, these 3 women were gonna kill themselves, and because of the work that you did, the intelligence you collected, that
Okay.
helped." Yeah.
I am going to dance around this as carefully as I can. Now I'm about to tell everybody in the audience and everybody listening to this episode a huge secret. My second fiction book is entitled Blaze of Glory. And if you haven't read that book, go read the book, because those female suicide bombers in that book are based on this mission that Alani is describing right here. That book came out years and years ago. I'd have never told anybody that story out loud before, but it's all based on that book. I'm here to tell you, you have saved lives. I know firsthand of the lives that you've saved, and it takes a lot of hard work. So thank you.
I am blown away, thank you, that was very kind of you, oh my god.
Yeah. There are some people that are sitting back saying, "This woman has nerves of steel. What does it take to be able to sit down without a bulletproof vest and a helmet on and have a conversation with an Al Qaeda official in Iraq, trying to develop a source so that we can get access to a high level leader?" Like, the courage and the nerves that it takes to be able to have that conversation over some chai in Iraq must be incredible. I'd love for you to talk to some of those folks out there that are saying, I don't even understand how this lady can do something like that, especially when she's rolling in on a soft vehicle and not wearing all of the huge protective gear that most folks are going to wear when they're meeting Iraq on or Al Qaeda on the battlefield.
Yeah, oh man, that's so crazy. You know what's wild is I actually wasn't scared of dying, which I think and I know we could spend a lot of time talking about this, but I think that's just the way I was built, like, for me, I had made peace with, like, when my time is up on this earth, like, I will have done everything I need to do, so we're not reckless with our lives, but we are taught the balance of risk and reward, and so anytime I went on mission, I knew that the intelligence I could get was worth my life, potentially, but at the same time, the thing that actually scared me was my imposter syndrome. So, the imposter syndrome, for those who don't know, is the belief that you're not good enough or qualified for the jobs that you're working or your promotions or awards or whatever.
You're just faking it, and you know you're faking it, but nobody else around you can see that you're faking it.
Exactly, exactly, and so I came in I'm for those who can't see, I'm, like, short, I look very young for my age, I'm obviously a woman, in a very male-dominated world, and I thought I didn't belong, and so everything that was scaring me actually had more to do with what if I can't hack it in the job? What if I can't save lives? What if I don't blend in with these teams? What if I don't get the intelligence? What if people don't give me the intelligence because of how I look? And I did have experiences where there was one in particular, it was a senior Iraqi government official. These army rangers brought me in, and in the first meeting, they introduced me, and this guy's like, "You're a woman, you belong in the kitchen," like, all this stuff, and I was like
Oh my goodness.
yeah, I literally was like, "These" I lost all credibility with those rangers, like, it was mortifying, and I went back and I cried ugly snot bubble tears, and I ended up getting connected somehow with some intelligence analysts at Shaw Air Force Base, so, like, rear Air Force Central Command. I don't even know this man's name, but he told me, he's like, "Alani KMH," and I'm like, "What does that mean?" He says, "Keep mama happy." He's like, "It doesn't matter what you look like, it doesn't matter what color or gender or anything you are. That guy has a wife that is demanding that he put food on the table, and you have the money to pay him." So, basically he was like, "It doesn't matter, like, all their beautiful ideology goes out the window when it comes to money," and he was right. So, like, because of that person, he gave me the courage to get over my imposter syndrome and remember that it's not about me, it's about saving lives. But yeah, I think it goes to a story of, like, we're all, in my opinion, built for the job and mission that we're called to do. So I don't think, maybe a normal person would be scared of dying, but I never was. Like, it's just kind of I don't know. That's not the scary part to me.
I am so impressed, and I know a lot of people are impressed. I did not miss this language just a moment ago, and I'm going to make sure that the rest of the audience didn't miss it. But this woman is saying, there are some things that are worth my life, and I'm willing to give my life for that kind of mission or that kind of information. And it's a very rare person, Alani, that has that kind of focus, discipline, and also understands your role in the bigger picture. By the way, there are a lot of people watching this episode on YouTube. And if you want to know what Alani looks like when she's sitting down in front of these very big, very strong, very intimidating Al Qaeda officials in Iraq, just watch this episode on YouTube. But man, it's impressive to see a woman who knows her place and her value and is willing to sacrifice everything up to and including her life for the mission.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, you're very gracious with your words, and I receive them. But I actually think a lot more people would be willing to die for something bigger than themselves. I think it's just a matter of them doing the work to figure out what that thing is. Like, I'm sure, if anybody talks about their kids, like, would you be willing to die for your kid? I think most people would probably say yes. But yeah, thank you. I think I'm just a microcosm of what the greater human experience is, but
I think you're a great example of a lot of very committed people in the U.S. military and the U.S. government. But I wrote down a moment ago, you didn't use these words, but I wrote down, are you living out your mission? And I'm talking about the listeners right now, because when you know your mission and it's that clear to you and you're built for your mission, like Alani said, then whatever that costs you, whatever that sacrifice that you need to make to accomplish that mission, it's worth it if that mission is that clear and that compelling for you. So for a lot of people out there, I just wonder, are you living out your mission? Can you say, like Alani, there are some things that I'm willing to give my life for? I'll also use this language, and I say it regularly. It's easy to be a warrior and get shot at in combat. To be honest with you, any moron can do that. It is far harder to live your life for something that is of great value than to give your life for it. That's a one moment in time event. Living your life for it is a relentless, every day, you can't let your guard down kind of thing. But we're getting off topic here.
Oh, no, that was
Um,
amazing.
I want to know what it's like to be part of the personal security detail of a very senior Department of Defense official. I did some research on you. Um, I know a few friends that were special operators, very, very skilled special operators who left the military to go make insane amounts of money working the personal security detail for some very, very wealthy, very, very, very well known people around the world. And they said, the life is brutal, Jeff. The money's great, but you'll never get a chance to spend it because you're never at home. So, what was it like to be a PSD for a very high ranking DoD official?
Oh, man, you do your homework. Are you sure you're not intelligence?
No,
Uh, yeah, so I mentioned earlier that the military criminal investigation organizations were all the three-letter agencies, and so that includes the Secret Service. So we provide our own agents that go through the same training that the Secret Service does. And so it was actually prophesied earlier in my career. I had sat down with our assignments person when I was very young, and he was like, "You would be great at personal security." And I like laughed and snorted out loud because I'm like, "Have you seen me, bro? Like, no." And I completely blew it off. And then I was sitting in Kuwait. I was the commander of our counterintelligence unit in Kuwait, and I got a call from my boss who was in Qatar, several countries over. And he's like, "Hey, um, your name came up. They want you to apply to be the security advisor." So the security advisor is the senior bodyguard. The security officers are the team of bodyguards. So they want you to be the senior bodyguard to the top Air Force official. And I was like, "You must have the wrong file in front of you. This is clear, like, here's my imposter syndrome again. Like, there's no way like anybody would ask me to do that." And I actually thought I was going to be the fluff package for whoever they actually wanted to win.
you're the throwaway
I was
package,
the
right?
fluff.
Like,
That's
we know it's not going to be her, but we'll put her and one other person in
right.
front of them.
Right. And then had to go through this interview and they called and they're like, "Congrats, you got the job. You have to leave Kuwait." I left a month before my assignment was up. And that was the craziest 2 years, of, yeah, no sleep. I mean, 3, 4 hours a night, maybe. And then when you're working at that level of government, like, people get to that level, like, in terms of who I'm protecting because they don't sleep. So, I'm still listening to the ding of the BlackBerry while I'm sleeping because they could change pickup time while I'm sleeping, and I better be there. So it was no sleep. It was traveling on so the 89th Airlift has, like, all the Lear jets for, the Air Force, and so we're flying to 3 countries in one day. I mean, it was the craziest job, but I learned so much. I finally broke myself of my imposter syndrome in that
Good
job.
for you.
I was terrified again, of, like, how I looked, and I don't look like a bodyguard, and a very gracious instructor at the schoolhouse was like, "It doesn't matter what you look like. What matters is your brain and how you control the physical space, and all like, 80% of personal security work is done before your protectee
Yeah,
sets foot in the
absolutely.
building." And it turned out that I probably had an advantage because of how I looked. So nobody expected me to be the bodyguard. But my trigger finger works the same as everybody
Of
else's. And
course. Yeah.
yeah, and you have to do is create distance and space from the threat and your protectees. So it was also a very hard time. It's the Pentagon, so it was a little bit soul sucking. But no, it was a wonderful 2 years.
Fun fact for you and the listening audience, I spent 23 years on active duty. I've been around the military since the day I retired, and I've never stepped foot in the Pentagon. And my goal in life is to never, ever step a foot into that space in my lifetime. I've done everything I can to avoid it for the very reasons that you just described.
You
Because
are a ninja, sir.
many people have said it is a black hole, and once you get sucked in, you're done for. So I've just spent
Yes.
my entire career trying to stay away from it. Never stepped a foot inside the building.
Well done.
I've been around there, been in the parking lot, but never been inside the building. Um, it's time for us to transition. But what I wanted the audience to hear is, man, this woman has incredible skills. She's got life experiences, like all the way back from childhood, growing up, with a father that's a foreign affairs officer, to the incredible career that you've had in the military. And you turn the corner. Actually, you don't really turn the corner, but you take those skills and you leverage them to do child protection. And that's really what I want to camp on now for the rest of this episode. Like, how does this transition happen? Because most career war fighters, they are focused on the next enemy and they don't see the vulnerable around them. It takes skill to even notice the vulnerable, little alone to decide I want to do something about that. So how does this happen?
Yeah. I guess to be as succinct as possible, I think
You
it
don't have to
goes
be succinct. We'll go for a long time on this episode, whatever you want to do.
okay. Um, I think now that I have the benefit of hindsight, so I think my whole life, like there were little breadcrumbs being tossed saying like, this is where we're leading you. So starting as a kid, I always hated bullies. Like it didn't matter. Like, let's say you and I didn't get along. It didn't matter. If somebody was bullying you, I was like on the bully because the idea of someone using their power, whether it's like physical or otherwise, to dominate a weaker person just infuriated me. And so I have all these memories of my early childhood of like that those were always these kind of core events in my life. And I mentioned already when I became an agent, I thought it was an internal affairs like snitching thing.
Hmm.
And then when I got my first confession on a child exploitation case, I was like hooked because to me that was almost like the ultimate example
And that
of
was if I remember, did you just say that was your first case ever? Was a child exploitation
yes,
case? Uh-huh.
yes, yes. And so after that I was hooked. In that assignment, my boss was gracious enough. He let me go to training for the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. So it's all the cyber, like to catch a predator ops and all the cyber related stuff. And so I worked cases, sent leads from Japan. So, and we were working with Japanese police to find people exploiting kids as well. It was really amazing. And then I always I jumped in and out because obviously we do a lot of counterintelligence stuff, and I was a bodyguard for a while. And so I was always tangentially involved in the child protection space. And then I left active duty after 12 years and I went into a nonprofit. It's one of the world's largest anti-slavery organizations. And I was in charge of their South American child rape and child sex trafficking investigations, operations, and then police training. So all the host nation law
Hmm.
enforcement, we would partner with them and run cases and then train them in how to strengthen their justice system to get better justice outcomes. So I did that for a while. And then my husband was still active duty. He got orders to Hawaii. So I ugly snot bubble cried, upset having to leave this job. And we got to DC, or sorry, to Hawaii, and then randomly ended up, I started volunteering for the Hawaii Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force because I had worked with ICAC for years, loved the mission. And then they offered me a job, and then I became the alternate commander. And so we set up all the large scale enticement operations, which are, it's the to catch a predator ops.
Yeah,
So
right.
Right. And then that morphed into human trafficking operations. And we were able to train people on all the islands, including Guam, and it just snowballed. And then now I have my own. So Mighty Sparrow Coaching is a coaching consulting company where we help people overcome imposter syndrome, but also I do a lot of tactical training and coaching to build the confidence of investigators and intelligence folks to protect kids. Because what I have learned when it comes to fear is the greater the stakes, the bigger the fear. So a lot of people don't put themselves in the fight because they're scared they're not worthy of the fight or that they're not going to make an impact in the fight. And so if I can get people confident enough to know that you as you are more than qualified to protect kids, I just have to teach you how you do that in your way, that can get more people in the fight because there are a lot of people who are self-eliminating because they think they're not good enough.
Yeah, and we've had guests on the show before, especially Jeff Teagues, who retired from the Army and started a nonprofit just to go get into this space and to uh, build skull games just so that he can help train and catch sexual predators. Um, and these are really, really talented, really, really intelligent warriors that we're talking about. It's fascinating to me how many of them have turned their attention to fighting the America's wars and winning, the next battle, to fighting the battle that is consuming the world right now. And it's child sex trafficking, well, really human trafficking and child sexual crimes. And it's fascinating to see people like you that are taking that incredible skill set and saying it just naturally transitions over to protecting some of the most vulnerable people on the planet.
Yes. No, actually, when people ask about my background, there were a lot of jobs I had that didn't make sense at the time, but now I can look back and be like, "Oh, that was actually
Yeah,
preparing
sure.
me for
Definitely.
this work that I'm doing now." And so, I mean, terrorism is an easy one because there's nobody better in the world at hunting terrorists than the US military. And so being a part of that find fix, that whole, targeting cycle, literally that's all I do, that's all I teach is how to do that and combine that with intelligence, which a lot of law enforcement agencies don't do as well as the military, is leveraging intelligence to get better case outcomes and operational outcomes. And so that's a lot of what I teach as well. And yeah, it is a very natural transition for folks and a very righteous mission. And I agree with you. Actually, the one lament I have about the space is I wish the community could see these warriors in action.
Yeah,
'Cause
it's amazing.
it is the most humbling thing, like, thankfully, I got to a point in my career where I had to be very intentional about every op or mission I did. I commit to being present for 90 seconds because things are so crazy, you're just
Yeah,
going all the time, but
yeah.
just to sit and take in, like, what I'm a part of, and so having run, like, dozens of operations, I just having people come up to me and be like, "I forgot why I joined law enforcement, and this has reminded me of why," and, other people saying, like, "It's 2 AM," and they're radioing me like, "We'll go as long as you want, like, we're not stopping until you tell us to stop," and I'm like, like, I mean, it's just like, that is why I joined the military, that's why I'm in law enforcement, is because of finding those humans that want to do that work is, like, it is incredible to be of service to them as a team leader, so
Well, you described it as there are lots of people out there that don't recognize the contribution that they could make, or maybe it's so scary, getting involved, even saying out loud human trafficking, child sexual exploitation, that right there, is there's such a stigma around that. Maybe there's a lot of people that would say, man, I would help because I care deeply about this. But one, I don't know where to start, or two, I don't have anything to bring to the fight. And maybe what somebody listening right now is hearing from Alani is, yeah, everybody can bring something to the fight, even if it's just being vigilant. Everybody can bring something to the fight to basically end human trafficking and child sexual exploitation on the planet.
100%. Everybody has a skill set. Now, I do think it is important to follow your calling, whatever
Yeah,
that
not
is.
everybody brings the same thing to the fight, right?
Right, exactly. So mine is protecting the vulnerable. For other people, it's homelessness. For other folks, it's, something like money laundering or whatever. But um, I hear it all the time from people who are like, I want to be a part of it, but I don't know how. And I ask them like kind of the proverbial question of like, what's in your hand? Like what do you have? And um, I work a lot with survivors, right? There's a lot of shame in the survivor community. The stats are 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 to 10 boys, depending on which study you're looking at, have been victimized by this. And when I ran the numbers, it was something like 75 million Americans are affected by this. And so I'm like, if you feel like you are far enough along on your healing journey, you're one of those 75 million, you want to speak hope to one other person about surviving. That is getting in the fight. If, let's say you're not there yet, you're not ready to share that story, but you make a mean casserole, you can make that
That's what
casserole
I'm
and drop
talking
it at
about.
someone's
Heck yeah.
house. And that shows love and support in a way that only you uniquely can. And I guarantee you that person receives it like they needed that meal in that moment, right? If you have a lot of money and you want to donate to organizations like school games or whatever, like what is in your hand? What do you have that could be of service? It doesn't matter how big or small it is. All those little 1%ers everywhere add up to really big impacts. You just have to have the courage to provide your 1% of
Yeah.
the solution, and that's it. So
Well, you were around Hawaii when Operation Keiki Shield started, and then you transitioned into Operation Shine the Light. Can you describe a little bit of your role in those two big operations?
sure, I actually created them. So when I started at Hawaii ICAC, so the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, it was like me and the commander, and there wasn't a whole lot
And
happening.
and a broom closet, right? With, like, a
Literally,
laptop in it. Yeah, okay.
literally. Like, we were using carbon paper and had a typewriter kinda thing.
Oh my goodness.
So, um, so my boss and I sat down with 17 all the law enforcement agencies in the state, and we said, "We wanna do these large scale ops. You bring whoever you can, you tell us what your wins look like, and we'll build them into the operation." And there was a lot of growing pains in the beginning, a lot of skepticism on what was possible. The very first arrest that we had on the first operation was a retired police officer. And, when, handcuffs went on before he asked for his lawyer, he said, "I wondered how long it was gonna take for you guys to come find me," kinda thing. And after that, it, like, was sold and everybody was on board, and so we did, let's see, by the time I left, I think we had 12 iterations of Keiki Shield on different islands. And then I always wanted to get to trafficking, but trafficking is a really complicated case type. So enticement easy because you don't have a live victim. And that makes the case a lot easier because you as the police officer
Yeah.
are the
You're
person who
pretending, yeah, you're
you're
right.
pretending, right? And so that helped me build the confidence of all the participants that they could be really successful in protecting kids. And then so Operation Shine the Light is our missing and runaway foster kid recovery operation because, foster kids are among the highest risk to being trafficked and sexually exploited. And so we partnered with a whole bunch of agencies. Um, National Child Protection Task Force is this incredible nonprofit, the Federal Department of Health and Human Services. So they do a lot of work with the funding of foster kid programs. We partnered with our local missing child office and child welfare services. So because for foster kids, the guardian of the child is the state. So we
Mhm.
get all the legal authorities in advance because the state is cooperating with
Yep,
us. And using the power of intelligence analysis, we're exploiting the kids' social media because kids put everything out there for everybody to see.
of course.
We're exploiting their contact social media and other digital intelligence methods. And so we're able to find and locate these kids. And then through the investigation, identify were you trafficked or were you exploited in any way? And then hold those people accountable, whether it's the foster parents or someone on the street or whatever it might be. And because law enforcement is so resource strapped, it was a great model because you can get people together for 1 or 2 days and everybody gets a win. And, we can just be a lot more efficient and cost
Yeah.
effective in that
Yeah.
way.
Man, I wish I had you on the show on episode 143. I was talking to Quintina Sony, and she is literally the personification of what you just described. Somebody who grew up in the state's care, ended up on the streets, was trafficked for a lot of her life, escaped the lifestyle at great risk to her own life. And then she and another lady who escaped ended up, starting a nonprofit just to love on, take care of, and help women who are escaping human trafficking now integrate back into society. But most of her episode is what you just described. That's most of her childhood and most of her life, really. So the idea that you're doing that, before it gets to her level or before it gets to that point is awesome. It really is. You transition into coaching, though. Obviously, you have some pretty amazing skill sets. You could just keep using your skill sets, putting those skill sets to work. Why transition into Mighty Sparrow coaching?
That's a really good question. I love doing the work. What I discovered though, as I progress in my career is capacity wise, I don't know, I'm going to throw a number out there. Like maybe I can work 10 cases at a time, but I have a max limit of what I can do with my energy and my time. And if I can teach other people how to do that, now we're force multiplying. Now we're creating greater justice system outcomes. And because I've had the benefit of working these cases on almost every continent, so Asia, Middle East, like South America, right? Um, what I have, like, you see the same themes across the board, and fear to me is the number one barrier to getting people in the fight. And, so if I can remove that fear barrier for people to put their best gifts in it the way that only they are created to do that, I can create force multipliers. And so when people asked about how I was able to get the astounding stats, so Keiki Shield, at the time that I had left, we had 90-ish arrests in about 3 years, and that was we had 0 before that for years, and then I have a 96% conviction rate in court, and we identified it's like more than 25 survivors. When people ask about that, I point to my job was actually just to bring the really smart people together
Yeah,
and give
right.
them the environment where they could provide their best gifts, and we had intelligence analysts coming up with the craziest ways of finding kids and finding these suspects, like, our intel analyst had a 96% PID rate, which positive identification,
Uh-huh.
right? So, before your suspect walked out the door, we knew everything about them, and it
Hmm.
was because of these incredible intel analysts who like, one of them kind of scarily came and was like, "I have this idea." And I'm like, "Do it," And because of that, now they're replicating that to other intel analysts who are able to get those greater justice system wins. And so that's why Mighty Sparrow came around is because I'm only one person, but if I can teach other people how to live courageously in their purpose and have confidence that when you present your gift in service of others, you can do the
Oh
craziest,
yeah.
most
Yeah.
amazing things. So,
You're describing right now a dream of mine. Way back when I was a sergeant in the Ranger Regiment, I always thought to myself, I would love just once or twice to take this entire destructive machine of the United States military, and especially the incredibly talented people in special operations, and put them on doing something good for humanity. And there's
yeah.
really no limit to what they could accomplish because there's nothing on the planet that can stop them on the battlefield. And it's always I've always thought to myself, man, if you could take this whole force that I'm part of and turn it loose for good, wow, the what could be accomplished is mind-blowing. And now you're describing that. I can only picture how satisfying that feels for the team of people that are working with you when you come up with these arrests, when you have these convictions, and when you know you're protecting children and rescue, literally saving lives.
Yes, you are 100% right. And it's interesting. I was thinking about this earlier of I love the DoD, obviously, like that's the family. But when your job is to make war and to kill, It is a zero-sum game. It's either I win or you win.
Somebody's
And
gonna
on our
live,
side,
somebody's gonna die. One or two of
right,
us, one of the two of us is gonna live, one's gonna die.
right, and I'm gonna be the one living, just so we're clear, right? Like, I'm going home alive. And that does unfortunately affect, I think, the DoD culturally because it's a war space. But to your point, you take that machine and you flip it to a
Mhm.
life-giving
Yeah.
space, and now, like, you've really expanded the possibilities, and that's where part of, like, what we do in Mighty Sparrow is help shift that mindset of it's not that you're winning or losing, it's you're always winning, even when you think you're losing. Like, I just talked to somebody about the idea of a tactical retreat, right? Like, I'm like, sometimes you have to pull back for a couple seconds to regroup so you can launch forward. And it might feel like a failure to you in the short term, but it's not. And so, I don't know, Jeff, it sounds like we need to have a conversation
She's
later about what you're building here because
sh
the world needs it.
she just said tactical retreat. Everybody in the military knows exactly what she said. Of course, the military doesn't ever wanna say that they're in retreat, so sometimes you find a different term to say, "You know what? We might have to drop back and punt right now because running it up the middle is not working for everybody." I
Right.
also wanna make sure that every listener out there heard her say, "All I do is win, win, win," because that's basically what she just said. In fact, if
Well,
I
we
could have
do.
the song playing in the background right now and not, violate somebody's copyright, I would.
That's so funny. I that song actually, whenever we got an arrest, I would actually play it in the
You
command
did for
post.
real? Oh,
I
that's
would play
awesome.
it. Yeah, it was super fun, so
Um, there are some people listening that are saying, "Okay, you got me. Maybe it's fear that's been holding me back because I really believe in this, like you're describing it, Alani. I wanna make a difference, and I just didn't know what difference that I could make, or I was so intimidated by this space that I just never even started." So obviously, they're not part of those three-letter agencies, probably not part of some government task force, but they do wanna make a difference. Can you give some advice to people right where they're at, just everyday people, how they can get involved in this space?
100%. So actually the core message that we push at Mighty Sparrow Coaching is the thing that you think is your greatest weakness is actually the key to unlocking your greatest power. So when you have imposter syndrome, that voice in your head is always telling you, I am insert reason why you're not good enough. So for me, it was I'm too small, too female, too brown, too young looking. The biggest imposter statements we see are I am not smart enough and I don't have the credentials. And but if you look at use my story as an example, it was actually because of my physical
Yeah,
appearance that I had
sure.
so much
Yeah.
success because I could go undercover in parts of Iraq that
No one
my
would expect that you
nobody
right.
right, exactly. And so the people that we work with, we figure out what that imposter statement is telling them and dig into that story because there's always an origin story, usually from childhood, of someone who told them that they weren't worthy for whatever reason. So if you can uncover what that imposter statement and that or origin story is, now you can change the narrative. And so for me, it was I had a college professor tell me I would never graduate, I would never commission, I'd never amount to anything. And that drove me to achieve, to
You
prove
said,
him
"Oh,
wrong.
yeah? Really? Watch this."
Exactly.
That's what I'm
So
talking about.
I benefited, but I hit a ceiling, which is why I left active duty at 12 years because I realized I was chasing proving him wrong over chasing the joy and the connection of just putting my gifts out there. And so when I discovered that, oh, actually being small and female and like all the things is my superpower, now I can put that out there and encourage other people. So I mean, there's a tons of stories. So like Malcolm Gladwell in his book David and Goliath talks about Fortune 500 CEOs. They found in a study they disproportionately have dyslexia, and when they peeled that onion back, what they discovered was that, people with dyslexia because you have to create a new way of learning how to read, that is the perfect skill in business. So, like, you go from having dyslexia and thinking you're broken to, how does it feel to be in the running to be a Fortune 500 CEO? Like, that's a bit of a reframe, right? So, it's just a matter of so for the audience, like, whatever that inner imposter is telling you that you've been running away from is actually the thing you need to be leaning into. And if they want to DM me, I can send them a very simple free exercise. So just DM me at Mighty Sparrow Coaching, DM me Warrior, and I'll send you that resource.
I was about to ask you, you just took the words right out of my mouth. There are lots of people that are like, hold on, I need to know a lot more about Alani. This is way too short. I got to know more about Mighty Sparrow coaching. So we're going to put the links to this in the notes. But if you want to know more about her, if you want to get connected, DM her the word warrior. And we'll put the links in there and you can get direct, some direct information from her. I do think the advice you're giving right now is the perfect way to describe your interview to everybody who's listening. There is all of us, there is something, a voice inside of all of us that says you're not strong enough, you're not smart enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not talented enough to fill in the blank. And that voice, if you listen to it, will cause you to never even try. You will never know if you're good enough, strong enough, smart enough, pretty enough without trying. Part of the reason this podcast exists is to cause people to say, I refuse to listen to that voice. I might not be strong enough, but I will never know until I try it. I'm going to try it. And then here's what I'll guarantee you 90% of the time, if you try something that seems really scary and there's a voice in your head telling you you're not enough, 90% of the time, you will surprise yourself. Now, not all the time, but 90% of the time, you will surprise yourself by how capable, how competent you might be, but you'll just never ever know that until you try it.
That is so true. And it's so funny. Like when I work with clients and we get them to take that one tiny step of action, um, and then they get through it. And to your point, most of the time they're like, oh my gosh, I did it. And I'm like, but did you die? And they're like, no, I
That's
didn't
right.
die. I'm like,
Yeah,
exactly.
it didn't kill you either.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that voice it actually is there to protect you. And so now people that I work with know when you experience imposter syndrome, it's also telling you that what you're working towards is tied to that life purpose. And what it's saying really is if you do this thing and you don't succeed at it, you're going to be unsuccessful at your life purpose. And then what are you going to do? But we know the reality is that that's just not true, right? So it wants to keep you safe. So it's like, don't even try, but it's going to nag at you. So you may as well just try.
Yeah. Well, here's a freebie for you, Alana. You're welcome to use this and you don't even have to mention me. I spent almost my entire career, 16 out of 23 years in the Ranger Regiment. I absolutely loved it in special operations almost my whole career. My second or third week in the Army in basic training, I made the mistake of letting people know that I really wanted to try out for the Ranger Regiment. And my drill sergeant looked me in the eyes and said, you will never make it. He wasn't being mean. He wasn't being ugly. In fact, he was being very gracious and very compassionate. And he said, let me list for you the 5 reasons why you'll never make it. And it shook me to my core because I just wanted to try it. I don't know if I'll make it. In fact, the stats say with the attrition rate that I probably won't, but I just want to try it. And that guy's voice rattled in my head for months. And then I just made a decision. I will never know if I can make it without trying it. The guy is probably right. I'll never be able to successfully get into this unit, but I will go to my grave never knowing if I don't try it. So I'm going to try it. And it ends up being something that I fell in love with and never wanted to leave. I would have never, ever made that, had that opportunity if I would have listened to that voice that said, here's the 10 reasons why this isn't going to work for you. So for the
That is,
listener out there, you will never, ever, ever know if you
yeah,
don't try. It's worth giving it a try, even if you fall flat on your face.
that is incredible. And I just want to highlight, Jeff, reflecting back on what you just shared, you're actually highlighting the cognitive triangle. So it's a term psychologists use that says thoughts lead to emotions, which lead to behaviors. So you have this thought that like, I'm not good enough because this drill instructor implanted that. And it could have created the emotion, the victim emotion of like, I'm not going to be able to make it. So I don't even try. And the simple solution was I chose a different thought. I chose, I have to try. And that created a different emotion in your body, which created a different outcome, which created your career, which created this podcast, which has created hope for so many
Yeah,
people. And that's one tiny step. Like, that's
sure.
all it takes. And
And
that's amazing.
that's something that you're doing all the time. That's something that every listener can do. I'll just say this, there were almost every day during the selection process, I got up in the morning saying, I don't think I'm going to make it. I don't know if I'll make it through the rest of today, but I do know this. I'm going to give it everything that I got. And when I don't make it, I can go back home and say, I held nothing back. I gave it everything that I got. And when I saw people dropping out, quitting, falling out around me, I just started thinking to myself, wait a second, maybe I do have what it takes to make it. All the way up until the last day, I still thought I'm probably not going to be able to make it today, but I will go home saying I gave it everything that I got. And what I'm trying to communicate to the audience is I surprised myself. I I would have never known that had I not had I listened to that drill sergeant and just decided I'm never going to give it a try. So for whatever your big challenge is out there, and you're saying to yourself, because of the imposter syndrome, you're not good enough, you'll never be able to succeed. I want to be an alternate voice, as Alani just said. I want to be the voice that says, you'll never know if you don't try. So why not give it a shot? Be smart
Amazing.
about it, but give it a shot.
Yeah, exactly.
I could go on and on for hours, but I really need to wrap this conversation up. There's so much more about you and about Mighty Sparrow Coaching that I love people to find out. Obviously, they can learn more about the organization at your website, but if they want to know more about you personally, where's the best place to do that?
I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. So
Okay.
Alani Bankhead on LinkedIn or Mighty Sparrow Coaching. I have both. Yes, it's my jam.
Okay. So we'll put links to all of that in the notes to this episode too. Thank you for this episode. I didn't expect it to go this direction, but man, I have a ton of great quotes from you that I'm going to use in the future. So thanks for being on the show with me.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's been an honor. And thank you for creating this incredible platform because truly, I do believe people are unbeatable at their life purpose if we have
Absolutely.
the courage to step
Yeah,
out. So thank you.
absolutely. I want to ask you the question that Alani asked. What fear is holding you back from doing something you'd love to do? Do you have that imposter syndrome voice in the back of your mind saying you're not smart enough, you're not fast enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not talented enough to even try? Hopefully, this episode with Alani has caused you to say, I'll never know if I never try. So, what do I got to lose? And you'll go out and tackle one of those fears this week. I also hope she has inspired you to go try to make an impact in the human trafficking, child sexual exploitation space. I really believe we are now at a place in humanity that every single good-hearted person needs to add their voice or add their skills, as simple or as minimal as it might be, to try to help make a difference and to protect the vulnerable in this space. Alani, thank you again for being part of this episode. And I want to thank everybody who was listening today. I hope you've got as many takeaways from this conversation as I did. I also want to thank those of you who stay connected with us throughout the week. I'm talking about the Unbeatable Army who are part of this list and getting content from me week in and week out. If you're not part of the Unbeatable Army, just go ahead and sign up for free by going over to unbeatablearmy.com. But I'm also talking about the folks that are connected with us on social media. If you haven't found us and started following us on social media, we're on almost all of the platforms. And all you need to do is search for @Unbeatable Podcast and you'll find us. But you'll also find people out there like James Bones Gibbons, who is our fan of the week this week. And James, we just wanted you to know that we think you're awesome. That's why you're the fan of the week this week. Thanks for joining me this week. I hope you were inspired, and I'll be right back with you next week. See you next time. God bless.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.